Hi there, everybody. So we're working on language, gender, and culture. And this is going to be the first reading by David Brooks. It's actually an opinion piece. That means that this is his opinion, right? He may be quoting facts within this, but this is his view of how the world works as far as language and culture, and especially gender in this one. So let me share my screen and we will read this one together. Okay, good. There we go. Share. All right. So you should be looking at my screen. All right. So on we go. Honor Code by David Brooks. Henry V is one of Shakespeare's most appealing characters. He was rambunctious, so in other words, wild when he was young and courageous when older. But suppose Henry went to an American school. By about the third week of nursery school, Henry's teacher would be sending notes home saying that Henry had another hard day today. He was disruptive during circle time. By mid-year, there'd be sly little hints dropped that maybe Henry's parents should think about medication for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Many of the other boys are on it, so they'd find school much easier. By elementary school, Henry would be lucky to get 20-minute snatches of recess. During one, he'd jump off the edge of the jungle gym, and by the time he hit the ground, the supervising teachers would be all over him for breaking the safety rules. He'd get in a serious wrestling match with his buddy Falstaff, and by the time he got him into a headlock, there'd be suspensions all around. First, Henry would withdraw. He'd decide that the official school culture is for wimps and softies, and he'd just disengage. So in kindergarten, he'd wonder why he just couldn't be good. By junior high, he'd lose interest in trying, and his grades would plummet. Then he'd rebel. In the official high school culture was uber nurturing, he'd be uber crude. Uber being overwhelming. So if the culture was overwhelmingly nurturing, he would be overwhelmingly crude. If it valued cooperation and sensitivity, he'd devote his mental energies to violent video games and aggressive music. If college wanted him to be focused and tightly ambitious, he'd exile himself into a lewd and unsupervised laddie subculture, and he'd have vague, high ambitions, but no realistic way to realize them. Day to day, he'd simply be completely adrift. This is roughly what's happening in schools across the Western world. The education system has become culturally cohesive, rewarding and encouraging a certain sort of person who is nurturing, collaborative, disciplined, neat, studious, industrious, and ambitious. People who don't fit this cultural ideal respond by disengaging and rebelling. Far from all, but many of the students who don't fit in are boys. A decade or so ago, people started writing books and articles about the boy crisis. At the time, the evidence was disreputable that some experts pushed back. Since then, the evidence that boys are falling behind has mounted. The case is closed. The numbers for boys is getting worse and worse. By the 12th grade, male reading test scores were far below female test scores. The eminent psychologist Michael Thompson mentioned at the Aspen Ideas Festival a few days ago that 11th grade boys are now writing at the same level as 8th grade girls. Boys used to have an advantage in math and science, but that gap has nearly gone. Boys are much more likely to have discipline problems. An article as far back as 2004 in the magazine Educational Leadership found that boys accounted for nearly 3/4 of all D's and F's. Some colleges are lowering the admissions requirements just so they can admit a decent number of men. Even so, men make up just over 40% of college students. 2 million fewer men graduated from college over the past decade than women. The performance gap in graduate school is even higher. Some of the decline in male performance may be genetic. The information age rewards people who mature early, who are verbally and socially sophisticated, and who can control their impulses. Girls may, on average, do better at these things. After all, boys are falling behind not only in the US, but in all 35 member nations of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. But the big story here is cultural and moral. If schools want to re-engage Henry, they can't pretend that they can turn him into a reflective Hamlet just by feeding him his meds and hoping he'll sit quietly at story time. If schools want to educate a fiercely rambunctious girl, they can't pretend they will successfully tame her by assigning her some of those exquisitely sensitive Newbery Award-winning novellas. Social engineering is not that easy. Schools have to engage people as they are. That requires leaders who insist on more cultural diversity in school, not just teachers who celebrate cooperation, but other teachers who celebrate competition. Not just teachers who honor environmental virtues, but teachers who honor military virtues. Not just curriculums that teach how to share, but curriculums that teach how to win and how to lose. Not just programs that work like friendship circles, but programs that work like boot camp. The basic problem is that schools praise diversity, but have become culturally homogeneous. In other words, the same. The education world has become a distinct subculture with distinct ethos, credibility, and attacking a distinct sort of employee. Students who don't fit the ethos get left out. Little Prince Hal has a lot going on inside. He's not unfeeling, uncommunicative, testosterone-driven cretin of common boy stereotype. He's just inspired by a different honor code. He doesn't find much inspiration in school, but he should. Okay, I have a lot to agree with this article with. I think, honestly, education is extremely important, especially in our society as we become more technology driven, more service driven. Your education becomes your doorway into jobs that you're not going to be able to get any other way. I have always harped on the fact that English is a big deal because words are your doorway into anywhere, whether it's filling out an application, whether it is putting your qualifications in a resume and then writing a cover letter that's going to highlight those to get you into the door to even get that interview. It's always words first, then the interview. And in the interview, you need to sound like you have it together, that you can do this job, that you're interested in care about what you're doing. And I will be totally honest, when I worked at Safeway, there was one person who filled out an application in orange colored pencil. And that application was put up on the on the bulletin board as something to laugh at. So I agree that schools need to become different. I don't know if all schools can be everything to all people. I think we need to start breaking down schools into smaller schools that can be magnets to the different student types. And I don't just mean boys over here, girls over here, but he is right. Girls do tend to mature earlier. Girls tend to culturally be told to be cooperative and sharing and caring and nurturing, whereas that is not the cultural norm for boys until they hit school. And then suddenly they're not supposed to be rambunctious and tough and everything else. They're supposed to suddenly do the same thing as everybody else. And I don't think anybody flourishes in a system that makes everybody be like everybody else. There are a lot of things that we need to be able to do the same because employers want us to be able to work with a diverse groups of people. We need to be able to learn and be able to do our jobs. We need to have those soft skills that employers want out the door, and those are our people skills, because they can teach you how to do a job, but most employers will say they don't want to try to have to teach you soft skills. So they want that to be the learning process as you are growing up and going through your regular schooling. So a lot to think about in this article, right? So I will join you again when it's time for our next article.